this section will be on the Qin Emperor and the reunification of China. So, first of all, one thing I want to point out is, remember, the Zhou dynasty's king was killed in 771 BC, and he was forced out of his old capital. And then, you've got Confucius in the 5th century, and things are bad. There's lots of war going on. And we're now in like 260 BC. So China's been kind of divided for a long time. And you still got people saying, you know what, China needs to be reunified. And that's really striking. And I just have to emphasize this. There's this idea that there is a China and it should be unified. And it's so strong that even after hundreds of years, Chinese people are holding on to it. And in this class, this isn't a class on Chinese history on its own. So we're not going to go into a lot of periods when China was divided. But there are long periods of time when China was divided. And there was no one China. And yet Chinese people had such a strong idea that China should exist and it should be unified that eventually they would put it back together again. And I think that's really striking. But I want to highlight that, right? It's this idea of China that helps keep it together. And when it falls apart, leads Chinese people to unify it back again. So we're going to look at this guy named Qin Shi Huang, or that ends up being his title. He's also called in English the Qin Emperor. And he's going to be the guy that successfully unifies China and rules it. When there's an R in front of a series of years, that it doesn't mean the guy was only like 11 years old. It means he ruled for 11 years, right? That's not his birth years. That's how long he ruled. Now, the Qin Emperor, he's called that because he was born into the state of Qin, and he was part of the royal family of Qin. In fact, his mother was the wife of the king of Qin. And then while Qin Shi Huang was like a teenager, I think like 13 or 14 years old, his father died. And so Qin Shi Huang became king of Qin, right? So remember we talked about Hatshepsut and the difficult issues with Thutmose III, because remember that was her stepson and how there was kind of competition between them over who got to govern Egypt. So you would think that maybe Qin Shi Huang would be in a better situation because, his natural-born mother is going to help him rule, right? He's a young man. He's not young man. He's like 13 or 14. And his mom's going to help him rule as regent. And you would think that would be okay because, it's his mom. She should, care about her son. It's not okay because his mother remarried and had new sons, his half-brothers. And as he grew older, as Qin Shi Huang grew older, he became more independent. His mom didn't like that. She wanted him to do what he was told to do. So she hatched a plot to kill her son and put one of his half-brothers on the throne. He found out about it and had his mother exiled. He couldn't have her killed. He had her exiled. And he had his half-brothers killed. And I think he also had his stepdad killed. So he was forced to be a very ruthless person from the get-go, right? If he was not a strong person, he would have been killed, right? He would have been gotten rid of. Now, think about this, right? Do you think someone like this, with this kind of family, is going to be inclined towards Confucianism, which emphasizes, parents are supposed to be benevolent to their kids, and children should obey their parents, or legalism, which holds that people are basically bad? You better believe he's inclined towards legalism because the guy's own mother tried to kill him. You're not going to talk a whole lot about family values when your mom tries to off you. And that shows us the difficult situation he was born into. And the fact that he was able to deal with it tells us something about him. This is a tough and smart guy. Now, this isn't a class again on military history, but I need to say something about how the military is changing. You may remember when we talked about the Zhou dynasty that I gave you the example in explaining the feudal system, how you would contribute chariots to the king. During that time period, chariots were the main source of military strength. But things have changed in the last few hundred years. Now, iron weapons are very popular. Iron weapons are very cheap and can be produced using methods of mass production. So it's not quite an assembly line, But in this time period, you had Chinese armies being outfitted with like identical weapons. So you would have like someone produce like tens of thousands of arrowheads, and someone else would produce tens of thousands of shafts, and you have someone produce tens of thousands of crossbow stocks and tens of thousands of trigger mechanisms, all of which were interchangeable and then could be assembled together into one piece. So it's almost like kind of a modern factory. But they would mass produce out of iron crossbows, iron and wood. Remember, iron is cheap, so you can make huge armies with it. And they would manufacture crossbows. Now, what's special about crossbows, they're basically point and click. They're really easy to use. You can take a peasant off the farm, and in a few days teach that peasant how to use a crossbow. And these crossbows are very cheap. And basically, the armies in this time period were massed armies using crossbows. You don't need to be a good shot if you got 100 other people shooting at the same target. One of you is going to hit it, especially when it's another mass army of crossbows. So what happens is you get huge armies that number in the hundreds of thousands. Well, that's great. That makes it militarily possible to conquer China because China is huge. You can't have a small army of chariots conquer China. I think that's one reason it stayed divided for so long. You need a large army to conquer China because you need a huge number of troops because there's so many people. Such a big country. You need troops everywhere, so you need a lot of them. And Qin Shi Huang is good at producing and leading these mass armies. So he's got a big army, and he's a brilliant man. And he's able, within a few decades, to conquer China, which had been divided for centuries. So a very capable person. Now here's the thing, though. Conquering a country, as we've talked about, and unifying a country, maintaining unity, is very difficult. They're two very different things. And he has to figure out, how do I know that the Zhou dynasty fell, right? He knows that the Zhou dynasty fell apart. He has to figure out how to build a government that won't fall apart the same way the Zhou dynasty did. Remember, the Zhou dynasty over time lost control of the nobles and their military. Remember, much of the Zhou military was under noble control. Remember, the Zhou gave land to nobles. In return, the nobles were supposed to send chariots to serve the Zhou king when he needed them. But over time, the nobles saw the land as theirs and stopped sending the chariots. So he needs to build a stronger government to hold China together. So he has to have people who are loyal to him and who are competent. That's similar to what the Zhou had. Remember, the Zhou also need to find that. They need to find loyal and competent people. But Qin Shi Huang adds something else. They need to be too weak to overthrow him. So he needs to help him rule. Got a big empire. China's a big place. To help him rule, he needs people who are loyal and who are competent, but at the same time are not a threat to his power. So he has to figure out how to build a strong government. These are his three requirements. Officials who will help him rule, who are loyal, right? He can't be everywhere at once. Loyal, competent, too weak to overthrow him. So there's going to be a shift to something we would call bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a complicated idea. To make it simple, he wants more government officials and less nobles, less aristocrats. Right? He wants to build a government with more officials and less aristocrats. And you may say, well, great. You just explained the word bureaucracy I'm not familiar with without giving me an explanation. So let me explain what I mean by more government officials, less aristocrats. What's different between a government official and an aristocrat? Well, remember, an aristocrat was given land by the government. A government official is given her salary. It's hard to get the aristocrat off the land once they're there. Give them a lot of land, they use it to get chariots. It's hard to get them off there unless you want to fight. But a government official is paid a salary. You can always stop paying the salary if the government official does a bad job. So instead of rewarding people with land and expecting them to give him military service, he has officials who he pays. And I want to stress, for the most part, these positions are not hereditary. It's complex. There are some hereditary positions, but they're connected to salaries, not land. It's a lot easier to take away someone's salary than it is to get them off the land. But for the most part, these positions are not hereditary. So if you're an official and the king you're doing a bad job, or you're not loyal, the king can just fire you and not pay you a salary anymore. And even if you are a good official, your child still has to convince the king that you should hire him as an official, that you'll do a good job. It's not hereditary. The land is not passed. The position, the government position, is not like land. It's not being passed from father to son to father to son. So what he's doing here, instead of relying on nobles to run his government to help him administer, he has government officials. What's the difference? Government officials are paid a salary and their positions are not hereditary. What's that mean? They're much weaker. They don't control land. They don't control armies in the same way that people did in the past. So because now he's got these government officials, he can make sure they're loyal and competent. And also because they don't have their own land, their own source of power, they're too weak to overthrow him. He does other things to maintain unity. Now again, please bear with me here. This is a little complex, but he changes the tax structure. Okay, he taxes people and land directly rather than requiring aristocrats to give military service in exchange for land. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you're back in the noble period and you're the person who drives the chariot. Your loyalty is not to the king of Zhou. Your loyalty is to the aristocrat who pays you. Armies are fundamentally loyal to whoever pays them, especially in the ancient world. In the old Zhou system of nobles who had land and were expected to raise chariots from that land, the people, the chariot drivers, the charioteers, were loyal not to the Zhou king, he didn't pay them, but to that noble, to that lord, to that aristocrat. But under Qin Shi Huang, what happens is he controls the money. He doesn't give you land and expect military service return. No. He taxes people directly. He taxes land directly. He gets all that money and then he pays the military. So the military will be fundamentally loyal to him because he pays it. Basically, instead of giving resources to nobles and expecting them to raise a military, he keeps the resources himself by taxing people and land, and then uses that to raise the army, pay the army. The army's loyal to him. He will also, to help maintain unity, will bring about a lot of standardization. He will standardize Chinese writing. Different parts of China started writing Chinese characters differently, and if that would have been allowed, the characters would have looked different, and the language couldn't have unified anything. He stopped that. He said, this is the way we're going to write Chinese, and everyone has to do it. He controls the army. He's a big, strong, scary guy, so people write like him. He wants them to. Especially his officials, right? You want to be an official? You want to keep your job? Write Chinese the correct way. He also standardizes measurements, and this is an example here of a measurement. This is for weighing grain, I believe. It's a weight. That makes it easier to trade all across the empire. He has the roads standardized, all made the same size. Basically, what happened was people used like wheeled carts, and over time they made ruts, and he made it so all the axles were the same width, so they would all match the ruts. This is good for trade. So he's keeping together, right? He's unifying the country by making sure the army, there's one army under his control, not under a bunch of nobles' control who will fight with each other. He's making sure people all write the same way. He's making sure people use the same measurements, and he's got roads, and his troops can go anywhere they want because the roads are standardized. And it's important, he will take the title emperor. He's the first person to say emperor. That may not seem like a big deal. You're like, what's the difference between king and emperor? In Chinese, emperor means like heavenly super person. So it means someone really, really powerful. this powerful person who will maintain unity. Sounds a lot like Han Fei's ideas, right? That legalism. Now, you can see from the fact that he wanted to standardize the written word that he saw writing and books as really important. Right? He saw writing and books as extraordinarily important. He knew that ideas would hold the empire together. Now, that sounds really nice, I think, but he had so much respect for writing and books as a means to hold the empire together, and he had so much respect for the power of ideas that books that he didn't like, he burned. Right? Down there you can see the books burning. And scholars who criticized that or who argued that those books were good, he had a couple hundred, or actually I think 400 of them buried alive. Right? There's the scholars being thrown in pits. Did this include Confucian scholars? You better believe it did. Did this include Confucian books? You better believe it did. He did not like Confucianism, didn't much like Confucius and those scholars. And he tried to forbid people from reading those books, the ones he wasn't able to destroy. He wanted only his version of history to be out there. So he wants unity. And he realizes that ideas are powerful. Ideas can divide or unify. So he gets rid of the ideas that he doesn't like that would encourage division and just tries to keep only the ideas that support him. He will also engage in massive building projects. Some things like the Great Wall, which will not only help defend China, but encourage Chinese unity. Because if you're on the south side of the wall, it means you're Chinese. You're under Qin Shi Huang's control. If you're on the north side, you're not. One thing that's also really fascinating is he will build an army in his tomb to protect him in the afterlife, the famous Terracotta Warriors. And this, I just want to point this out. We can see here the end of human sacrifice in China. They don't practice human sacrifice. Even Qin Shi Huang, as powerful as he was and as ruthless as he was, he doesn't do it. And there's these soldiers, they're really cool. They're all individuals. You can see in that image there. There's thousands of them. What's also central and what's very important about this, having all these soldiers, is this shows the end of human sacrifice. Remember, he has to have mass armies in order to conquer China. Ironically, war made human life precious. When armies were very small, you had plenty of extra people. You didn't have anything to do with them if you were the king. You're like, I don't care about these people. It's okay just to go ahead and kill them. But now killing people means either killing potential soldiers, right? Human sacrifice means killing potential soldiers, or killing farmers to feed those soldiers. So what happened was progressively in China, they used statues to take the place of human beings. So it's great. No more human sacrifice. Good deal. Now, eventually, though, Qin Shi Huang, his empire he's built and his dynasty is going to decline and fall. Why? He exhausts his people with building projects. The Great Wall, the Terracotta Warriors, a bunch of other stuff. There's only so much people can do. Not to mention all the fighting and the conquest. He was often too strict with punishments. He could be just overly brutal. So strict that people were like, geez, I know that was a bad guy, but do you really have to do that? Right? Did you really have to punish the criminal that severely? And he often punished people for disagreeing him, even when they were right to do so. For example, one of his sons said, you know what, Dad, you're working the people too hard. You're exhausting them. They're tired. Let's give them a break. And he was right. And the Qin Shi Huang responded by exiling his son. And he had a fundamental misunderstanding. He thought basically everyone was just bad. All right, he basically thought everyone is just bad. And you just got to punish them and punish them and punish them. And it's just not that way. Not everyone's so bad. Right? Not everyone's out to get you. Now, what eventually happens to him, he wanted to live forever. And so he tried to find all these like elixirs and magic potions to try and keep him live forever. And Chinese medicine had an interesting theory about why we die. And the theory was this, was that death was change. Right? Think about it. You get old, you change, you die. Right? Death is change. Now, so the idea was we need to figure out some way to stop us from changing. The way to do that, Qin Shi Huang believed, and Chinese medicine believed, was to find something that didn't change. Right? Death is the result of change. Let's find something that doesn't change. If we find something that doesn't change, and we bring that into our body, we eat it or we ingest it, make it part of us, we'll stop changing, we won't die. We know something that doesn't change, mercury. Mercury doesn't change, right? The element mercury does not react really with other elements. So the solution was, death is change, mercury doesn't change, I should drink a bunch of mercury. And that's what we started doing. And the problem with that is, mercury is a heavy metal, and if you start like eating and drinking mercury, you will die. But you'll go crazy first. And that's what happened. He went insane. How insane was he? There was like a storm on the ocean, and he was really mad that there was a storm, so he ordered his troops to punish the ocean, and they went out and they whipped the ocean. And like I said, he went crazy and died. The son who succeeded him was too weak to hold everything together, and the Qin dynasty fell. Now you may say, Dr. Rausch, this is kind of a ripoff. You told us you were going to explain how China got unified, and I mean, yeah, China totally got unified for 11 years, right? 221 BC to 210 BC. What's the deal? Okay, well, here's the deal. Qin Shi Huang, his dynasty might have fallen, right? But someone else, a man named Lu Bang, would reunite China very quickly, building on Qin Shi Huang's work, and establish the Han Dynasty, which you'll note lasts about 400 years. So it's true the Qin Dynasty didn't last very long, but just a few years later, China's once again reunified. So what Qin Shi Huang did fundamentally worked. Right? What he did worked in many ways, trying to build this strong centralized government. It's just he went too far. He didn't quite get the balance right. He was too far to the strict side. So Lu Bang and his successors, and they do this successfully, they have to figure out how do you form a strong government without being too strict. And the solution was synthesis, taking two different things and bringing them together so that they reinforced each other and complemented each other and addressed each other's weaknesses. So basically the Han Dynasty, under Lu Bang and his successors and later Chinese dynasties, will use Confucian ritual and morality to encourage benevolent rule and the development of virtue among the people. Confucius said people are basically good. I don't know if I agree with Confucius, but a lot of people are basically good. And for a lot of people, if you use correct ritual, you teach them correct morality, they will be good. And the Han Dynasty, Lu Bang and his successors realized this, so they accepted Confucianism. But also, they accepted, and so because of that, they encouraged Confucianism through publishing Confucian books and promoting people with Confucian knowledge. You want to be a government official? You got to understand Confucianism. And later on, an exam system would be developed to figure out if people really understood Confucianism. And again, we can see the importance of writing here. Scholars are all about writing. Books are about knowledge. And because China shares this writing, all these people can learn how to read and read the Confucian books and learn to think like Confucius and be good. But you're maybe saying, well, wait a second, but not all people are good. Well, guess what? We can use the harsh punishments. We can use legalism when ritual and morality fail. So even though Confucius and Han Fei Se understood the world in very different ways, the Han Dynasty and Lu Bang figured out how to bring their worldviews together in a very simple and elegant way. Use Confucian ritual and morality on good people, and when people behave bad, you punish them very severely in accordance with clear laws. This balance worked. And it meant the Han Dynasty would last about 400 years, and it meant future Chinese dynasties would last a long time, and it also meant that even though the Chinese might be divided for hundreds of years, they would reunify and bring their country back together again.